Hey everyone. Okay, so this is just going to be a, well, possibly quick, possibly not, tutorial on how to create tiling textures in Photoshop. So when I say possibly, I mean that I may decide to just keep working on it and make it cool and do a couple of them. Or I may just show you the basics and then, stop the video and I don't know, we'll see. Um, so here's the gist of it. You see Photoshop's open. I've got some photos here. In fact, I have a few open. These are actually photos that I have taken myself, either with my cell phone camera. Actually, I think most of them. Maybe this one is actually my actual nice SLR. But most of them probably going to be my cell phone camera. Because these cell phone cameras are pretty awesome these days. You don't have to have an amazing, like, super expensive SLR to capture textures. Um, just remember, next time you're running around doing anything, pull your cell phone camera out every now and then and start taking pictures of potential textures. Start collecting a texture library. Now, in this case, obviously, it's all food and candy because I was creating creating a class based on creating a gingerbread house. So that's why we're making tiling food or candy textures. But let's dive in. So here's the process. First of all, you want to try to take an image, and if you'll notice the one consistent thing about all these images is very much a top down, like the perpendicular to the surface, right? So if this is your surface, make sure looking at my camera. Okay. So if this is your surface, this is like, let's say, a sidewalk, a piece of concrete or whatever. This is the flat section that you're trying to capture. What you want then is to have your camera. Let's say my Wacom pen is the camera, and this is the front of the camera, the lens. You want to make sure that the camera is completely perpendicular to the flat surface. You don't want to get any sort of angle. You don't want any kind of perspective distortion. So perpendicular, so you get this. You're capturing this as flat as possible. Oops, yikes. Dang headphone cord. Anyway, so yeah, and then try to achieve that, and then from there on out, the next step is in Photoshop. And lighting. Also, you want ideally to get nice, flat, even lighting. Um, Although that's kind of changing sometimes now with later steps in the process. But in terms of actually using for a color texture, you want it to be nice, flat, even lighting, ideally with less shadows, which means actually one of the best times to capture these sorts of textures is actually when it's overcast, because when it's overcast, the cloud layer actually softens the light, so the shadows aren't nearly as harsh, which is better for this sort of thing. Anyways, so now once we've got some images to work with, which we do, this is the process of how to crop it and set it up to make it tiling. And tiling is really important for video games. For surfaces that are going to repeat and have like extend, like especially if you have a scenario in which, let's say, a ground texture, you're going to want that, if you're going to want that to repeat quite a bit, because if you imagine like a video game world is huge, you've got like this big giant level, and the ground is one big giant object. You can't. There's just no way you could paint every inch of that ground uniquely. It would just break the game engine. So what you have to do then is paint a little section of the ground that can repeat over and over and over. I know I'm probably over explaining this. I know there's probably plenty of people. Some people might watch this and be like, "Well, obviously, I know what the hell that is." So this is also speaking to beginners. So just bear with me if you're not a beginner. But if you're not a beginner, you probably know how to do this anyway. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to crop this, and let me explain why. Because right now this is a square. It's a non-square image. This is a rectangular image. Most cameras I actually don't know of a camera. I don't know of any camera that actually shoots a 1 by 1 square image. Um, if there is one, I don't know about it. So they all usually shoot rectangular, right? That's why you get landscape and then portrait, depending on how you angle the camera. Point is, you need a square image for this to tile properly. It's not going to tile properly unless it's square. And not only do you want it to be square, you also ideally want it to be a specific resolution, that's a power of 2. But we'll get to that in a second. So first of all, we need this to be a square image. So let's start with getting that. The easiest way to do that is if you go to the crop tool, which is right here. It's also the C key on the keyboard, but the crop tool, it's fifth one down on the tools. Easiest way to make sure it's a 1 by 1 square, perfect square, is just go up here where it says ratio. And if it doesn't say ratio, then pull this down. In fact, you could just pull it down right here. You could just type in 1. You could just type in right here 1 and then 1. That would do it. And it does this right here. But yeah, otherwise just pull this down until it says 1 by 1 square. Now that it's going to force it and lock it into a 1 by 1 square. So all you got to do is just adjust this, and for the placement, and then now it will be a 1 by 1 square. Now, other things to consider is you ideally may want to get like as much of the texture, like if you have a whole bunch, like the cookie, for instance, since I'm staring at a cookie, I'm gonna try to fill this space pretty well, like crop down so that it's mostly just cookie, showing. But at the same time, I mean, I don't want to crop it like down this far necessarily. There we go. Like I don't want to necessarily. I mean, I could crop it down that far, but one, if I crop it down that far, I'm losing a lot of resolution, right? I'm losing a lot of resolution that way. So it could get a little pixelated if I crop way too far. Two, checking my camera, make sure you're seeing my hands. One, two. Two is you may lose a lot of interesting texture that's potentially there. So I want to try to capture as much of that as possible, both in terms of resolution and just getting nice elements. Like if I make this a little bigger. Now this I could just go with this because then there's absolutely no stuff around the sides. But I'm gonna try to get as much of that cookie as I can. And again, I could try to, like, if I do this is probably acceptable. And that way I have no white around the edges there. If I had a little bit of white around the edges, I could clone it out because I'm going to have to clone stuff anyway. So it's not the end of the world. But this will make my life a little easier if I don't have to clone that out. That way I only have to clone out the seams, which again is, excuse me, part of the process that you'll see momentarily. But once I've chosen my crop that really just focuses in on exactly the texture that I want to capture, then I can just hit enter, or or I can double tap on the screen on the crop. Now I'm done with the crop tool. I don't need that anymore. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see exactly what I captured and check. It looks like I've got a little bit of a lens. I think I got a little bit of a lens blur around the edges there. Not the end of the world, but it could make this a little bit more challenging. So we'll see. But anyways, I'm done with the crop tool for now. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off. I'll switch to actually I'll switch to the clone stamp tool, which is what I'm gonna use next anyway. The clone stamp tool is down here. You see my cursor, and if you mouse over it, clone stamp tool S key. I'll just get that ready. But before I do that, before I actually use it, I need to actually make it tile and or create the scenario in which it starts to tile. And this is where a lot of people, for some reason, I don't know, they always forget this step, and it's actually the most crucial step. Making sure it's square is important because it won't tile properly if it's not square. But the next step is the crucial aspect that makes it tileable, and that is this. It is, if you go to Filter, Other, offset. So again, filter, other, offset. And it's kind of funky because you're like filter other, like, I mean, it's kind of buried in a weird spot, I guess. But anyways, filter, other, offset, and then here this window here pops up, and what you need is you need it to shift both on the horizontal. Now, if you just did one of these, like if you just shifted it horizontally, um, you could actually just make it tile in one axis. 99% of the time, though, you're probably going to want it to tile in both directions. Both, if you're in a 3D world, this is going to be tiling in the X and the Y. So chances are you want it to tile in both directions. Otherwise, you'll get seams in one axis. There may be exceptions to that. Maybe you only need it to tile in one direction, depending on what the scenario is, and that's fine. But yes, chances are you want to and I'm actually just dragging this slider sort of randomly. I'm not actually. It doesn't matter much, really. It doesn't matter much, really, where you adjust these values to. What you're really doing is you're creating seams. You also want to make sure this says wraparound. I believe it defaults to wraparound, but just keep an eye on it. Make sure it does say wraparound. And preview is fine. But you see these seams that I'm creating here? I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. That's good. So see what happens now is now you've created these seams. The real important to understand why this is necessary is making when it says wraparound, when you shift this over one direction or another, what's happening is like this edge here that was over here, it's pushing the edge out this way, but it's taking what was here and putting it over here. The beauty of that is, I mean, I'll zoom in a little bit. The beauty of that is this little chunk of pixels right here, it's identical to the edge of these pixels right here, which means that if you butt these up against each other in a repeating texture, that these pixels match these pixels. These pixels match these pixels, which means that they'll butt up against each other perfectly and seamlessly. But obviously, the one thing that is a problem is that it created seams right through the middle. Ultimately, excuse me. Ultimately, what it did is it shifted the seams to be sort of in the middle of the piece here, which makes them easier to see and easier to fix. Which is what the next step is to get rid of those seams, and that is using the clone stamp tool. And there's some other factors to really making this even better, but we'll get to that. Let's get rid of the seams first, and then we'll start to troubleshoot troubled areas. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in kind of nice and tight, and sort of use my clone stamp tool, and then try to patch out some of this stuff. And there is a little bit of lens blur in here, so it is not the perfect image. Ideally, cat hairs. Anyways, ideally, you would want to take a photo that has absolutely no blur anywhere. So you'd want, and one of the good ways to achieve that is to make sure you have really good lighting. If you don't have really good lighting, then your camera is going to sort of it's going to have to change some of the f-stop settings, which can introduce blur, depth of field. So that's not ideal because you want the entire surface of the thing to be in focus. Anyways, but we'll work with what we got, and we'll see if we can make this usable. Okay, so what do we do? Clone stamp tool is on. How to use that is I'm gonna first of all make my brush a little bigger. My favorite way is to hold the Alt key and then right click and drag. Also, I can also change the opacity this way too. So holding the Alt key down, I can right click and drag left and right to change size, this brush size, but I can also go up and down to change the brush hardness. And I'm actually going to go with a much harder brush right now. And I want to explain this. When people are first doing this, including myself, when I first learned how to do this, I tended to keep the brush hardness down because it's, you know, a softer brush. Basically, it makes it feel like it's blending the textures a little bit more nicely. But the problem is that's exactly what it's doing, is it's blending from one spot to another. And when you blend from one spot to another, it starts to get a little smudgy. It feels a little blurry and smudgy. So it kind of gets rid of the seams, but instead of a seam, now you just have a smudge. So you see this long smudge going down the side. So I've sort of learned that it's a little more challenging to do this without smudging. You have to use a harder brush, but you just have to be a lot more careful with how you paint, or how you stamp, rather. And then you can go back and use a softer brush, like zoom in real close and use a softer brush where it doesn't seem quite as noticeable. But I'm going to start with a hard brush to really just mash out this this area. So now to use this, the clone stamp, you turn on the brush, obviously, and then holding the Alt key, it goes into sample mode. So you tap a spot, let's say like down here, and what that does, now you see as I move my brush around, you see that like the piece of that image right here has been sampled into my sort of into my brush, if you will. But it's not just taking that and stamping it down. You'll watch as I brush. It's also moving the sample area. So see, there's a little crosshair down there. Little crosshair where it's sampling as I drag. And now I've gone too far now, and now it's sampling this seam and putting it here, which is not ideal. So I don't want to go that far. But I'll just try to get a little bit in here. I'll make a brush stroke, try to sample some area. But then what I'll do is I'll go sample another spot. So I'm holding the Alt key, sampling another spot, and I'll try to like paint in some areas. I also want to get rid of some of the dark area right here. Something else that you need to be concerned about as when you're creating a tiling texture, getting rid of the seams is vital. It's really important. But you'll notice if bits of the texture are like, there's really dark areas and really light areas, if there's a lot of contrast in certain spots, then those areas are really going to draw the eye, and suddenly your brain will start to perceive that pattern when it repeats. When it repeats, your brain is going to perceive, oh, look, there's the dark spot of the texture right here, and it keeps repeating over and over. Ideally, we want to sort of paint those areas out and sort of kind of even out the texture a bit to where the lighting values are pretty similar across this, across the texture. So I'll just keep going with it for a second and see if I can sort of give myself something a little bit better to work with. Now I'm creating more sort of, because I'm using a hard brush, it's creating these kind of funky areas and seams. But that's okay. I'm just sort of blocking this in at the moment. I could either be super careful right now, or I can try to like just rough it in fast and then go back in and clean up the edges, which is what I will probably do. Excuse me, sorry. Cat hairs in my throat, I think. Anyways, so yeah, I'm really trying to focus in, and zooming in a little helps. I try to zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, because you want to zoom in to really kind of get nice seams and kind of blend across these areas. But at the same time, zooming out really helps you keep an eye on the overall sort of, texture, how it's sort of coming together, and if it's coming together, and so that's kind of a nice. It's a good idea to do, is just kind of zoom in a little, then zoom back out and check on it, and just kind of go back and forth. So I'm definitely going to try to get rid of this whole area, and I think what I'll do is I think I'm going to sample like this whole area right here. I'm going to get a nice big brush, sample it, and just sort of throw that down. And that really sort of evened out this whole area. That dark spot was killing me. So this will be easier to work with. And to, again, you can kind of get away with, like, even some of these, like, areas, if you're zoomed out, if you're zoomed out, you might not even notice some of that stuff. It might not be so bad. But you know, if you want to be a craftsman and you want to really put some nice effort into making these nice, then yeah, be a craftsman. Like even though maybe nobody will notice this, take the time. Go in, zoom in tight, and sort of sample a nice area. And then again, this might be where I soften the brush a little. So I'll turn the hardness down a bit, and then I'll maybe paint in some softer spots to sort of blend those seams. Get rid of that spot where, like, you see that sharp transition there between the two surfaces. I'll try to start getting rid of some of that with a softer brush, basically. Um, that'll help a bit. Okay, and then here again, I could just patch, and you could sample from anywhere. You just got to keep an eye on it, and don't if when you start to go too far, your sample point may start to blend right into the it may start to blend right into the seam somewhere else, and suddenly defeats the purpose, right? All right. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking for the little gaps where the seams are and trying to patch those up. There's a little bit of blur right there. Yeah, actually a lot of blur. So let me take a nice area that has a little bit, less camera blur, maybe over here. And in fact, I'll just make the brush size pretty big, and I'll increase the hardness again. Oops. Just a bit, and then sample this, and I'm just gonna throw down a big blotch right there, because the lens blur was getting pretty bad on that section. Maybe I'll sample over here again, shrink the brush a bit, and sort of patch this up. Because again, that lens blur was sort of killing it a little to where it wasn't nearly as appealing there, and it became kind of noticeable. Okay, and then over here, so there's still a bit of a seam there, so I'm going to sort of throw down right there. A little funkiness there, so let's shrink. And ideally, as you sort of go, you're looking for those little seams to patch, and then ideally, as you go, it's starting to look nicer and nicer. But so you want to like shrink your brush. You can start with a large brush just to block in, just patch up, sort of trouble areas real fast. But then as you go, maybe start shrinking your brush, because there's areas that look okay, but you want to sort of clean them up a little. And of course, keep in mind if you're using your Wacom tablet, which you should be, that pressure sensitivity will help sort of with this brush as well, where it if you adjust the pressure your brush stroke is using, it will grow or shrink the brush or change the hardness depending on how you have it set up, and that will sort of speed up your workflow where you don't have to constantly change brush size or brush hardness. The pressure you use on the brush can sort of achieve that for you. All right, and we're getting somewhere. One little troubled area I just saw right here. This transition right here. I'll zoom in real close. The transition right there from dark to light right there is pretty kind of harsh. So I will sort of try to transition that a little bit nicer. Let me adjust my hardness and maybe pick a spot over here. And I just noticed there's a bit there too. But this is sort of where the art comes in, where you can kind of carefully sort of attempt to make something that looks nice. And that is it's a fun challenge. Try to really make this feel good. And again, also the ultimate test. The ultimate test is actually making it tile, putting it onto an actual tiling surface. That's the real test. And sometimes you may have to go back and adjust. Maybe you make a tiling texture, you put it on a model or a terrain, and then you realize, oh my god, it's got a seam, or oh my god, it's got it's got a spot that's like super high contrast and it's drawing my eye constantly. So this is definitely going to be a bit of an iterative process where you have to make a texture, go back, check it, make a texture, go back, check it. Sometimes maybe you do nail it right away, and of course the longer you've been doing this, if you've made 100 tiling textures in your lifetime, then obviously you kind of get quicker. You notice things quicker where you may not have to iterate quite as many times because you spot the problem areas right away. But I will say for sure, one thing you should do for sure, especially, no, not especially, just in general, you should always do this, is, I just noticed a spot. I just noticed something. There we go. Sort of clone this out a bit. Anyways, so one thing you should definitely do is run the filter again. And again, this is probably something I think people don't do very often. This was probably okay the way it is. But watch this. If we do another filter, other, offset, and hit OK, always run the filter again, because check it out. Part of our seam cloning process created new seams because we were being kind of fast and loose. So now we've introduced some new seams, but not much. It's not much. It's still most of the way there. I just have to kind of reclone out these seams. And the other thing is, the crucial areas are where, or the areas that now we should really sort of avoid and leave alone, are the edges. We introduced the new seams because our brush came up against the edges and created new seams. But now if we avoid those, because if we look, there's no seams here, so we're good there. All we got to do is just sort of very carefully get rid of these seams here now. So I'll sample over here and just sort of come back here. And so this is like the next level when you're trying to you sort of you did the first offset filter and you got rid of the seams and you're like, oh cool, I'm done now. Well, no, take your time, go back and run the filter again. Basically, you should keep doing this. Run the filter, paint out the seams. Do that until you don't see seams. So if you run the filter, if you run the offset filter, and no seams show up, then you're done. Or at least done unless you put it into the game engine and you realize, oh my god, there's some crazy contrast or there's something you need to sort of troubleshoot. Sorry, I'm gonna have to get some water or something soon. Okay, so again, I'm just sort of going in here and patching this up. Again, for the most part, this was pretty good. There was just a little bit of cleanup. And then again, zoom out. Zoom in, zoom out. Zooming out helps to sort of help you find troubled areas. But zoom in a bit and right where the seams were, wherever you saw seams, zoom into that area and sort of scroll past and just sort of get a nice close look and see if there's any seams you missed. But this is feeling pretty good. I think I will call this good and I will save it out. And maybe I'll move on to the next one. So let me save. In fact, I will save. What is this one? This is a sugar cookie? No, it's a... I don't know why I'm not... It's one of my favorite cookies. Oh, Snickerdoodle. That's what it is. So, yeah, one of my favorite cookies. And it makes it for a great tiling texture. You could actually probably even use this tiling texture for something other than like a gingerbread house or cookie thing. It's sort of generic enough of a texture. You could probably throw it onto a terrain and people wouldn't realize it's not like dirt or some sort of alien dirt or I don't know, whatever. It's kind of funny what people do with that. I've seen a lot of artists do crazy stuff. I'm going to call it Snickerdoodle tiling. It's good when you're, in fact, I'll even underscore that to give it some separation. It's good, by the way, to, if you do create some tiling textures, name it properly, name it tiling, put tiling on the name. Oh, and also, of course, good idea to start saving. I actually created a library in Google Photos. I highly recommend Google Photos. But I created a library in Google Photos of tiling textures that I've created. So I have a texture library that I've created where I've literally collected all the photos that I've specifically taken just to capture textures. So basically the rough photos that I've just captured. So I've got a photo album for that in my Google Photos. I also have an album I created that is just for if I've taken the time to create a tiling texture, then I want that in my library that's accessible to me from anywhere. So now I have a tiling texture library that's on the cloud that I can then pull from at any time to create, like to use, for any of my projects. So that's a valuable asset, a valuable resource there. So do that. If you're going to take the time to make a tiling texture, why not make sure it's accessible anytime you go anywhere? Some of you may be just working from home and that's it. But if you're like me and you actually have to go to work and I have my workstation at work and then I have my workstation at home. Sometimes you bounce from machine to machine and you're like, oh crap, I'm on this other machine today and I don't have access to my stuff. Make sure your stuff is accessible everywhere. Put it on the cloud. Just a thought. Okay, anyways. So this one's good. This one's done. And I will probably... it's a good idea to save the Photoshop document just in case you want to go back to it. But to be honest, I wasn't really being very careful. I was using destructive editing techniques. I was not being careful or non-destructive. Which is fine because honestly, this is just a fun little tutorial I'm making. And I've gotten to the point where I've done this enough times. It doesn't take me that long to sort of do this again if I wanted to repeat this process. It's taking me longer right now because I'm explaining it, so I'm not going to even bother to save that because again, I've done this a million times. I'm going to save that texture though. I'm going to save that tiling texture because I think it came out pretty cool. If I really need to edit it, I can either redo it or I could actually just take that actual image and then just run another offset filter onto it and play with it some more. But yeah, I will save that just because why not? That's just one more resource for me to tap into if I need it. Okay, so I was thinking maybe the next one I would do just for fun. And again, you don't have to watch this. I'm basically just gonna do it again. But this one I think might be a little more challenging because it's got some much larger shapes, much more lumpy, as opposed to like the sugar cookie. The Snickerdoodle has very fine levels of height. It's like sugar. Oh, there's a little bit more sugar on this spot, or slight discoloration. That's the majority of the texture. It doesn't have a lot of depth to it, texture-wise. This one though does have a lot more depth to it. Like these are sort of physical shapes that have depth to them and roundness and curvature, and which is cool, but it's going to be a little more challenging. And honestly, I just kind of I want to take that challenge. I want to have some fun with it, see what I can do with it. Also, when I move on to the next part, I'm making this video right now, but I was thinking I may make another video that talks about how to use these tiling textures in a program that will actually take the photo, the image, the color texture, and create a depth texture for it, a normal map texture. Anyways, just so you guys know what to look for soon. But let's have some fun with this. Again, you don't have to keep watching. You're welcome to fast forward, rewind, just stop entirely. It's up to you. But I actually have some music going, and I'm just going to go through the whole process again just for fun. And again, this could be more challenging. We'll find out. Maybe I will struggle, which is always good for learning. So again, I already have the 1-to-1 ratio. It defaults to that because that's what I used it for last. I do want to avoid this photo definitely has some shadows involved. Like you see here, there's kind of a shadow where there's because this is not a perfectly even surface. These candies are sort of. I tried to make sure it was mostly an even surface that I captured, but I didn't want to shove my hands into the candy. I was actually at the store when I took this image, so I didn't want to like shove my hands in the candy and sort of spread the candy out evenly. If I was really, really serious about this project where this was really vital that I capture the best possible thing, you should just buy the candy. Which ironically, you know, if you actually buy the candy to work on a actual project that you're trying to sell, uh, you could potentially write it off on your taxes. You know, like okay, I bought this candy specifically to capture it as a texture. Um, Anyways, just kind of a funny thing there. But yeah, so I'm gonna try to zoom in a little bit. I want to try to avoid some of the areas where the lighting sort of fades. I also want to avoid the edge of the thing there. In fact, I can even rotate this a bit if that helps me to sort of position things a little bit easier. I think I'm gonna need to crop down a little bit more. And so now I may capture a little bit of negative space somewhere, but again, I can use the clone stamp tool to sort of um, adjust for that. So let's try this. Let's see what I can do with this. I think. All right. So I hit enter. I can already see a problem that's going to show up just looking at this image. This this right here, that one half of a banana. Why? Because it's the only one in here. Oh no, there's one other one up here, but it's lit differently. Um, but the point is, the reason I know that's going to be a problem is because if you only have one of something in this sort of scenario, that's going to jump out at you and it's going to repeat super obviously. So I'm going to probably want to clone. I'll probably clone both of those out. No big deal. And then there's also a little bit peeking through right here. It's not going to be that hard to clone out, and those are tiny little areas. So let's get to it. Let's play around. Cropped it down to my 1:1 ratio. Let's go to filter, and I could just go here because I know whatever, it's fine. Um, so filter other offset. Actually, no, I'll do it. I'll do it right. I'll go the long way, just for you guys. Filter other offset. And I'm going to try to push it a little farther into the middle this time, just because of some of the shadow areas there that are kind of concerning me. It might not be that big of a problem because something that I'm hoping to use this again for my next sort of video tutorial, which some of the software that I'm going to show in the next video actually, in theory, should be able to get rid of some of those shadows and sort of get rid of a bit of that, the larger sort of depth, you know, where the shadows are being created. Anyway, I'm curious. I'm curious to see if that'll be the case. So I may not even try to really, I may not even try to get rid of those shadows. So, anyways, but we do need to get rid of the seams because again, that's kind of the whole point. So I'm gonna do what I did before maybe and sort of get the first of all clone stamp and get a decently large brush. No, there's a million ways to change brush size. You heard me tapping on the keyboard. That's just because the bracket keys also change brush size, and sometimes I still do that out of habit from my many years of doing this. But ever since they introduced this hotkey or this sort of ability, Alt right click, I'm like, oh god, it's so much better because I can just really quickly change brush size and hardness, and which I should do. I'll just leave it pretty hard. This is going to be a scenario though. Knowing what I know about how this stuff works, having a little bit of softness in my brush with the sugar cookie, the snickerdoodle, I think I can get away with that a little bit more because of the type of, like, the granular sort of, it's almost like sand. And I just, knowing how these things work, I know that I could probably get away with a little bit of soft brush. Here though, if you use a soft brush, it's got to be like at the end when you're just literally touching up one piece of the fruit. Anyways, but let's get to it. So, all right, let me sample an area and let's just throw down. And I'm going to try to be somewhat careful. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let's not repeat this this really obnoxious thing here. Let's fix that first. That way, if I'm clone stamping, I don't want to start dragging more copies of that into my image. I've already got one that's enough. So let's get rid of that before we even start anything else. So to do that, let's see. Let's put tricky. So this is going to become like a puzzle too, because there's things laying on top of other things, and ideally maybe finding something that's kind of on a top layer might make this easier, I think. All right, so we have to choose what's going to be on top, what's going to be sort of underneath. And this actually might be a good opportunity to start being non-destructive. Um, but you have to flatten the layers before you do the offset. So let's see. Let me just see what I can do. Let me just try. Let me shrink the brush, and just really carefully. Yeah, so definitely being non-destructive is going to be a lot easier, because you start to paint in, and then you're like, oh my god, it's not working. Okay, so yeah, so being non-destructive, it's like it's going to take some compositing skills to sort of get this right. Um, might be able to just copy that one, and because I'm gonna need to do this on a layer, because I'm gonna need to paint in, paint out, paint in, paint out, and right now I can't do that with the straight up clone stamp tool. I can't paint in and paint out because I'm painting destructively right now. Whenever I do this and sample and then paint right down onto the surface, it's actually altering those pixels. That's destructive. So I'm gonna need to do some compositing, which means I need to work with layers. It's not a big deal. It's not. In fact, you should do this. You should do things non-destructively anyway. It's safer. It's better. I was just being lazy, which is not good. Okay, so let's do that. Let's add a layer. In fact, actually, it might be easier just to duplicate this layer. Let's try that. Let's just duplicate this layer. Um, and this way, when we start sampling something and painting in, painting out, we can sort of patch it together. So let's try that. That way I can actually erase out when I need to. Let's take this orange right here. See if we can put it right here. So the trick is, though, because this is underneath that, I think actually the easiest thing to do, or the best thing to do, might be to find things that are on top of other things or underneath. Actually, that might be the best thing. Let's try that. Let's try going underneath, because this one's mostly underneath a bunch of things. It's only on top of that one. Let's try getting like this guy. See what I can do with that. So what I'll do is I'll paint in. And I'll just paint it all the way in, actually. Let's do that. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to this layer. And now you notice now I'm getting serious. I'm hunching over and let's even, what the hell? Adjust the camera just so you can not lose me completely. All right, so yeah, I'm in serious mode. And then you get to stare at the top of my head while I do this. Okay, anyways, so I've got the clone stamp tool to just throw that guy in there, but the trick now is going to be to zoom in nice and tight and sort of patch this up where, let me use the eraser tool. Actually, what I should do is use a mask, because the mask, again, I can paint in, paint out. Non-destructive, all about the non-destructive. So what I want is the brush tool, shrink it down, and then let's see. So painting with black and white. So I know I'm kind of, some of you, if you know Photoshop, you'll probably follow along a little bit better. But since I'm sort of coming up with my idea as I'm going, I'm not really speaking to beginners anymore at the moment. The beginners sort of portion ended when I started compositing. Okay. Oh, here's what I do. Okay. So now what I'll do is I will paint in and paint out until it looks like this one is underneath the green one. Same thing here. Like I want the green one to feel like it's on top. And then also this banana should also be on top. So paint in, paint out, and then zoom in real tight, maybe shrink the brush even more, and just really carefully. I'm painting a mask, so I'm painting in and painting out, but it's a mask, so it's not actually altering the pixels. It's just sort of compositing them together. You guys see my cat? My cat cracks me up. Like, silly cat. You just laying there putting her paws on me. So this is why it's hard to get work done at home. No big deal. It's kind of awesome. Just saying. Sorry, just adjusting this camera somewhere. There we go. Actually, I don't know if that's better. Can you see? Still can't see the Cintiq because it's kind of underneath my other monitor, but whatever. All right, so cool. Yeah, so I'm tapping the X key. I'm tapping the X key to swap between black and white, and I'm painting on the mask, which I can't really see right now because my hand and my cat's head is on top of it. But yeah, I'm switching. So I'm switching back and forth and painting in, painting out on that sort of layer. But what I really want is for this green one to feel like it's on top. Oh, now my cat is attacking my oops, did she change it? My cat is attacking my Wacom pen. All right. No. Stop it. All right, anyways. Painting in, painting out. Trying to just really sort of blend that out. So now from a distance at least, it's probably going to sort of hold up. I could definitely do a better job of that. But I don't want to like waste too much time. But let's try to fix this one as well. In fact, this one I will just probably achieve by this one I'll probably just achieve by blocking in. I have to get rid of the seam right there too anyways. So this one though, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. This one's going to be easy because that's completely buried by the other stuff. So let's maybe let's take this. Let's take this green right here. Oops, I'm on the brush tool. Let me switch to the clone stamp. Oh, I see. I was like, what's going on? Why is my clone stamp like sampling white? It's because I'm on the layer mask right now. I got to switch back to my actual image. So I'm going to switch back and forth between layer mask and image and layer mask and image. Let me shrink. Which is again one of those things about Photoshop is it's really easy to forget which layer you're working on or layer mask and whatever. Okay, so let me just throw down some green right here, right where it needs to be, and then again I'll switch back to the layer mask, and then paint out to make sure. Oops. Oh, clone stamp. Okay, I need brush. There we go. Okay, so now painting out. So again, what I'm doing is I'm throwing in that green to make it feel like it's underneath, but then I'm painting in, painting out to make it feel like these other surfaces are on top of that. So it gets, you can zoom in real tight, and if you really want to be careful, and honestly, this sometimes it's overkill. Like, I mean, maybe if I'm being super careful, maybe that's overkill. Maybe I don't need to be so careful with my edges here. I hate the grid. Let me get rid of that. Zoom out a little. Maybe I don't need to be quite so careful with my edges because maybe no one's ever going to see it that close. Very good chance that's the case. But, again, it's that craftsmanship, right? You really want to take pride in what you're working on and do your best. Make sure it feels as good as you can make it. So now there you go. That little splotch of white has now been filled with green. So it looks like there's one of these. Actually, this exact one is sort of tucked underneath it. And again, from a distance, it reads pretty well. This one actually kind of stands out a little bit on its own, but it's not too bad. Okay, so sort of patching up the little troubled areas. This whole area is going to need to sort of change anyway because of there's a seam and there's some shadow there. There's all kinds of issues. Let me go ahead and make a big giant brush. Let's go ahead and switch back to my actual layer instead of the layer mask. I'll switch back to the clone stamp. Make it nice and big. Adjust my hardness. Let's just sample maybe this little area here. This is a pretty nice area with nice, not a lot of shadow, and there's a lot of, it feels like it's going to be useful. So I'm going to take sample this area here and just start throwing in, just really try to get rid of some of those seams. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm being pretty fast and loose and kind of rough. But as I'm painting, I'm also sort of looking. As I'm painting, I'm sort of also looking to avoid, or not avoid. Sorry, I'm concentrating while I'm trying to do this. But what I'm trying to do is create a situation that makes it easier for me to clean up after it later. For instance, like I'm sampling areas and I'm trying to like paint. I'm also varying the pressure, as I stroke to try to create a situation where it looks like, oh, this one, God, sorry, I'm just all over the place right here. I'm trying to create a situation where it's easy to sort of layer in the things I need to layer in later, like as I stroke through it. And I still have a seam up here. I'm gonna come back to that. I'll do that later. I'm gonna focus on one seam at a time. Shrink my brush down now, and now, actually, what I could do is just jump right into the mask, but I'll try to do what I can with the clone stamp first. Let's see, like put in a banana here. And then let's see, maybe sample this little guy here and put him right there. I'm looking for like edges now that are sort of oh, this is a good one, yeah. So I'm looking for edges that basically aren't matching. That's going to create a seam right there. So it'd be good to avoid trying to hit the edge. Whenever you go touch the edge again with your stamp brush and stuff, you got to realize it's going to create another seam that you'll have to patch up again in the next round. All right, let's see what I can do with this. Maybe I've given myself enough to work with. Let's try actually one more time. Right, maybe right here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into my layer mask and sort of zoom in. Oops, brush. So I got to switch. Again, the layer mask is going to be the brush tool. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to paint paint with black at first to sort of, I threw in this little chunk here, but I got to clean up the edges of what I did here to make it feel like this is actually on its own, chilling here without like the border. There we go. All right, so this one. Okay, so that, yeah, I think that's kind of cool. That sort of works. And then I could sort of composite that. Maybe I'll leave in some of that shadow. Actually, that feels pretty good. So it's this is really taking the time to really adjust these masks and like make it feel like these are legitimately composited together and not just getting rid of seams, getting rid of the sort of like right here where I'm painting in, painting out on the mask. Putting some effort into making this come out nice is going to pay off, and it makes the whole texture just read better. So getting a little bit of problem there, but I think I can live with that. So painting in, painting out on these masks. Over here again, sort of got a problem area, so I'll paint in, paint out, and see what I get. So it feels like painting in a little bit around here is working. Okay, I see. So there's an orange here. There's a problem there though, so I'm gonna go ahead and let me see what's underneath. Oh, underneath is actually better. That makes it a lot easier. So it looks like two bananas on top of each other. Although, crap. Okay, I see. So shadow, bam. That could work. It's basically as long as it sort of matches and feels like it's, things are layered the right way. I think that's the crucial aspect. So again, having this green one on top sort of feels like it's like on top of that, and so it hides the problems there. So here again we got some problems. So let's see, paint in, paint out. Alright, so I might need to grab another thing. Yeah, so something, if I grab something else to layer right there, it'd probably help to clean that up a bit. But I'll come back to that. Let me just get it, one step at a time, sort of get these things pieced together. So painting in, painting out. Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, so this one's gonna sort of come like this. Yeah, okay, cool. And I again, you guys don't have to keep watching. I'm just rambling. Now I'm just sort of having a good time, problem solving, sort of trying to create what I need. But I'm sure this is probably no longer entertaining, so feel free to do what you want. Okay, there we go. Bam. Let's see right here, this one. Yeah, I'm gonna need to do some more work right there too. So here, let's see. Can I get rid of this whole banana? Kind of. So that's again gonna be another problem area. So I think this whole chunk area, this whole area probably needs something. So basically, I'm just picking and choosing. Should this one, be on top? Should this one be on the bottom? How do these layer? Can I just go up this far with this, and then is this gonna read as if it's underneath? Shrink my brush a little. Yeah, that feels pretty good. But again, cleaning up the edges as much as possible, so that it really feels like there's a separation there, but it's like laying on top of it and not like not sort of forced and composited together very awkwardly. Getting there. Takes a while. This is what really takes a while. And again, I do want to finish this because I'm actually having fun, but we'll see. I may stop the recording in a bit so you guys don't see a 6-hour video and go, oh my god, I can't watch that. Let's see. Although you never know, I've had students come back to me. I've made like a 4-hour video, and I've had students come back to me like You know, I actually watched the entire thing. Let me get back to here. Eh. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So I think what I'll do is I'll just keep working on this. Hopefully, this is giving you some ideas of like sort of how this process works. And you see from a distance, like parts of it are starting to work out. Um, this texture is definitely a lot more work to create a nice tiling texture because of the. Hopefully, you guys understand that. Hopefully, I'm explaining this well. It's because of the shapes that are in this texture. You have to take more time. You have to basically sort of composite and layer each of these. These are the runts, of course. You know, candy. You have to look at each individual piece of candy and then sort of layer this one on top of that one and really make it feel like it's compositing correctly. With sort of more generic and granular sort of textures that don't have as much depth and shape to them, it's not nearly as much work to make things tile. But you know, again, looking at a texture and knowing whether it's going to tile easily or not is going to be something that you sort of develop over time. Where after you've done a few of these, you start to realize you look at a texture and go, oh god, oh that's going to be a pain to make tile. But that's all part of it. And again, just because it's a pain doesn't mean I'm not having fun. This should be fun. It's like a challenge. Can you make this image repeat and make it look good in a repeating texture so that you could like wallpaper a whole 3D environment with it? So hopefully you guys learned some stuff. I know it's like now been an hour-long video. The majority of what you needed to learn was towards the beginning, but maybe some of this, watching me sort of troubleshoot some of this stuff, maybe that helped you a bit. Sorry I didn't really clarify too much. There's plenty of Photoshop tutorials out there for learning how to use layer masks and learning how to use layers. Maybe you could just sort of watch what I did and learn. And I talked about it a little bit. Maybe I'll go into more depth on a Photoshop tutorial some other time. I think I actually have at one point. I do have a drawing, like a sketching tutorial. Pardon me again. Sorry. I definitely need to get some water. Anyways, so feel free to browse my channel for some other Photoshop relevant tutorials. There's not many, but there's one or two maybe. Okay. Good luck, everyone. Hopefully this helps, and you can use this to wallpaper stuff. Again, I'm demonstrating using candy for gingerbread house purposes, but this could apply to anything. Tiling textures are used very heavily in 3D, not just for video games, but just 3D content generation in general. Yeah, and also, I am not the only one out there on YouTube with a tiling texture tutorial. There's probably tons. So feel free to browse other people's tutorials, maybe if they sort of go deeper into the Photoshop skill sets and tools and hotkeys and so forth. Feel free to browse those. Always look for as much information as you can. Don't just rely on one person or one tutorial to learn anything. Always try to get, because every tutorial there could be like a hotkey that there's a hotkey I don't know or I don't use, and it could really benefit you. So, anyways, good luck, have fun, and make some awesome stuff.